Hello everybody, welcome to my book vlog. Today we're discussing a piece of non-fiction. Today we're discussing God, A Human History by Reza Aslan. And would you know, I can't get the reflections off my iPad again. But this book is in the shops, as you can imagine, in the run up to Christmas now. And it's from a guy that's already been a New York Times bestseller with his work on religion. Reza Aslan is a God scholar. And in God, A Human History, Reza takes a look at what we understand and the challenges we have with the divine, and asks us to look again at the origins of faith and the birth of religion and the subsequent development of organised and therefore after that institutionalised religion. Now, that may sound heavy going, but I've been reading quite a lot of Yuval Noah Harari recently with Homo Deus and Sapiens, and which just blew my mind. Both those books are fantastic. And I really hoped for the Reza Aslan book on God would be in a similar vein, you know, really accessible, fascinating anthropological discussions about how we as humankind, mankind, how we have developed and what we can see from going back through our history, what the early signs are of why we behave the way we do. And you know what? For a large portion of the book, that is exactly what happens. This book is 300 pages long, and for the first section, it's absolutely fascinating. Reza starts with Homo sapiens, and even before that with Neanderthals. He looks at discoveries and cave paintings and discoveries of temples and early signs of religious spaces, and he looks at how it's clear that even our early ancestors had an innate understanding of the human soul, how their dead were always never left out on the earth to be pecked, to, you know, have their bodies pecked and just wither away, but instead there were burial rites, there were traditions, there were rituals, and how this comes at a really early time in human development, and how even our very earliest ancestors were seen to create organised spaces of worship which were separate from places, from habitats, from homes, that were special and reserved and had special paintings. And what these paintings represented, did they represent an understanding of worship, of something that we would call God, and what did these figures look like? It is absolutely fascinating, and Reza really picks apart all of the early discoveries that we have around the world to see how different communities in our early ancestors, whether it be Neanderthal, whether it be Homo sapiens, what they understood to be the human soul, and how this sort of developed into a worship and understanding of there being something on the other side that could perhaps bring them hope and good fortune in the present world. What I really liked, a good example of this, was Reza talks about a cave, a Homo sapien cave, I think, that's been found in Argentina, and has lots of really fantastic, beautiful artwork, which is clearly devised itself as a place of worship. But it's been recently worked out that all the artwork, particularly a whole wall which was just of palm prints, how every single one of those palm prints is female. And what that means for how perhaps our early ancestors saw women as obviously the creators of life, the givers of birth, and how that in itself became part of something to worship, and therefore were women seen as partly divine. Really fascinating questions. Absolutely, I just flew through the early part of this book. I was just absorbing it, and it's so easy to read, it's so accessible. And then he sort of goes on into how this develops through the Greek and Roman eras into families of gods, and he also looks at Eastern religions as well, how you have numbers of deities and what these different deities represented, what their different responsibilities are. And he also then looks at how humans therefore started to turn these deities into almost human form. It wasn't so much that God built us in his image, but were we in fact designing God in our image? Because that's instinctive. We understand what we look like, and that's perhaps all we can picture. How can we picture or give creation to an image for something that we have no understanding of, so of course you make them human. And he looks at the Greek Zeuses and the Roman gods, and actually how this in turn became problematic, because you're trying to create something that's divine, but of course you're making it human, which brings into discussion human frailties. And oh, my mind was alive. It was just like, wow, wow, wow. And then Reza goes into how we develop from this into monotheism. So how religion took a turn, and how eventually some religions came through, whether it was through Akhenaten in Egypt, and of course eventually Constantine in Rome, and subsequently Muhammad with Islam, is to create monotheism, there being one God, and one God that is indivisible, and the existence of a single divine entity that was creator of all things. And so we look at this human history to get from this understanding of the spiritual, which seems to be almost innate, to the creator of an institutionalized, organized religion that looks at a single God, whichever religion that is, whether that be Islam, Judaism, Christianity, whatever, the single indivisible God. Fascinating. I absolutely love this. However, this book, like I said, was 300 pages. Half of that is footnotes. This book, in terms of text, is only actually about 150, 160 pages long. And you sort of have this wonderful build-up, and then it starts getting into organised religion. It starts getting a little bit problematic and tricky. There are sort of times when, for example, when he brings in Islam, Muhammad, there's no mention of any division in Islam. There's no sort of Shia and Sunni. Those words are never mentioned. It is straightforward Islam as a monolithic block. Similarly for Christianity, he talks about how Christianity has problems that differ from Judaism and Islam because of the Holy Trinity. So Islam and Judaism can claim to have a single God that's indivisible and is solely divine, because no human beings can be divine. It is only God, and it's only one God. However, could that be true in Christianity when we look at the problems that are caused by having Jesus? Was Jesus divine? Was he a prophet? Reza looks like the Nicene vote under Constantine and the decision to make Jesus divine, and therefore Christianity cannot claim to have a single indivisible God, because if Jesus was partly divine, and indeed we have the Holy Trinity and the Holy Spirit, then God cannot be the single divine thing. And actually I thought, Reza himself admits that he's a Christian and that he had a long path to that, and he's a very religious person, although you don't get that from his prose until the very end. I just thought, oh, that's very simplistic, because that's not what a lot of Christians believe. There's a lot of Christians that don't believe Jesus was divine, and that actually the phrase the Son of God is not literal. And so you sort of start getting to these issues towards the end of the book, where you just think, oh, that's a bit sweeping. Also, we don't have a lot away from the big three religions. We don't have much of the Eastern religions. We don't have much on Buddhism, on Hinduism. It's just not there. So this is a very singular look. That's not to say that it isn't fascinating. For example, I learnt that in early sects of Christianity, there was more than one God. Not that there was more than one God, but there were two different gods depending on which sect you followed, whether it was Yahweh or El. And actually huge amounts of the Bible are the reconciliation of the various Christian sects into a single agreed God, and what that God is called and represents. So I did find this illuminating and fascinating. But then this book stops in the 12th century with this random discussion on Sufism, and then the book just drops off a cliff. It stops in the 12th century, which of course, as we all know, the human understanding of the divine and the religious did not stop in the 12th century. In fact, you have a huge swell of arguments and wars over this later across the globe. And you sort of feel like, I don't know whether Reza had a word count to get to or whether he had a book deadline, but you have this fascinating sweep through human history, through ancient Egypt, through ancient Rome, back through the Neanderthals and the Homo sapiens, up through the Middle East, up through Jewish sects and into Christianity and the split of Judaism and so much. And then boom, it just stops. And I have no idea why, because the stop is so abrupt and makes no sense for a discussion of God as a human history, as the divine. And like I said in the later stages, there's no nuance, there's no room for debate about what's happened within the big institutionalized religions and the divisions within them. So this book goes from being like practically 5-star to practically 2 in the matter of 20-30 pages. And the book closes with a very personal conclusion from Reza, which makes no sense. He's gone through a very academic but fascinating discussion about, you know, what we understood to be the divine. And then he has this sort of 20-odd pages about his personal faith and how we should all believe in God. And I just thought, right, I'm not quite sure that belongs in this book. So it was really disappointing. I wanted, like Yuval Noah Harari, who I've just compared him to, his books are 500, 600 pages long, and they are brilliant cover to cover. So I don't know if Reza or his publishers were afraid of a longer book and thinking, oh, people aren't going to pick up a 500-page book about God. Well, the truth is they have been. Look at the sales for Homo Deus. Look at the sales for Sapiens. I mean, if you're worried about non-fiction, look at the sales for Naomi Klein. Whether it's, you know, No Logo or This Changes Everything. You know, her books sell. Non-fiction sells. So I don't quite understand the decision to just end this book 170 pages because it's just, I don't know, is there a God Part 2 coming? So it's a real disappointment. So God, Reza Aslan, basically, if you're getting this for Christmas, because, you know, a lot of people I suspect will be getting this for Christmas, it's particularly pertinently published just in time for Christmas, you'll enjoy it for the few hours that you read your 150 pages. You'll love it and then you'll be disappointed. To actively go out and buy this, I mean, that's your own decision, but the 150 pages I loved, but then it's just, oh, such a disappointment to just stop when the story itself and what that's been discussed hasn't ended. Nevertheless, I got a lot out of this for what I did read. God by Reza Aslan, A Human History.